where it goes down, where you hear about the sports all around town. In the country, full of controversy to the highlights. You just not safe in the limelight.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another great episode of the Stoop, where we talk hoops, and more hoops. I'm your guy, TJ. Always got to shout out our great people over there at Nuts and Bolts Sports. Got to give a big shout out and say hello to my partner in crime, co-creator, my man, Kev P. Kev P, talk to the people, sir.
As always, it's a pleasure to be here, sir.
Yes, indeed. And listen, this is big for us. It's our first illustrious, great woman that we're going to bring to this to the Stoop, and she's going to talk about sports. She's had a great career in basketball, spanning over 17 years, internationally, domestically. She's been a part of and had her hand in NBA Africa, global NBA. She's been a producer and content creator for the WNBA, also has worked on the WNBA finals. You can catch her now on them international sidelines for USA Basketball, being the creative director. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Miss Saudia Mitchell. Yes, indeed. Coming to the Stoop.
Good evening. Thank you, guys. I appreciate the welcome.
Absolutely. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing really well. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, let's get into it. When were you first actually exposed to just sports in general, any type of sport?
That would probably have been the Olympics. My family, I don't know if you guys had the same experience, but the 88 Olympics, the 92 Olympics, we would all sit around winter and summer as a family and watch together. So that was my first exposure to athletes and competition. Yes, I grew up in New York. The Knicks were a thing. That was when they were in their heyday, when you had guys like Mace and Xavier McDaniel and Patrick Ewing, Bernard King, but I wasn't aware of any of that. So the Olympics was kind of like the starting point for me, and then it went from there.
Okay, amazing. Now, they always say a picture is worth 1,000 words. Do you know when the first time you actually took on a camera, felt the camera, and took maybe your first picture, or maybe you've seen the camera for the first time?
That's a really good question. I actually don't remember. And I was a writing major when I was in college. So I didn't actually start doing any camera work until I got in the job at the NBA. And that was post 2003. My father, he was kind of an amateur photographer back in the day. I have a sister that was also an amateur photographer when we were in high school and in college, but I had no interest in it. And then I just kind of fell into this work, and to fast forward 17 years, here we are.
Wow, interesting. Okay. Kev P.
With all the camera works that you've had over the years, you talk about how difficult it is to be in an arena, to jockey for space. Mm-hmm. Lighting isn't exactly your friend. You have audio issues all the time.
Yeah.
Despite all these things working against you, you're always able to produce. How fulfilling is it to capture gold unknowingly? And on the flip side of that, how disheartening is it to think that you've caught maybe an iconic moment and it doesn't really pan out like you thought it would have?
I'm going to address the second question first, because that happens more often than not, where you have, you're not delusional. You're just so focused and in this bubble that you're not realizing there are some things that are kind of working against you. And then later on, when you go through your footage, or you go and see if you have the photos, and you start scrolling through and you're like, oh, it didn't turn out the way I wanted. But it is what it is. It's kind of like you have to grow some thick skin and not worry about what you didn't get, and then make the things that you did get work. So the first question, unknowingly capturing something that turns out to be gold, I can't even describe the feeling. Sometimes it's just the smallest detail too, because it's, everybody watches a lot of this content that's on the social media apps now. And there's a lot of great creators out there, a lot of amateur creators that are really good. But there are some things that professionals do that separate themselves. And I'm talking about the smallest detail, like when you capture somebody's eyes moving and you can tell that they're about to pass something, or when you realize that there's a play about to happen and you capture the lead up to that so that you're able to tell the story so much better. Those are those moments when you go back and you look through your footage and you're like, oh, wow, this was good. And it makes you feel accomplished,
Wonderful. Wonderful. There's some great coffee table reads and almost more so pictorials. I want to reference recently the late great Kobe Bryant's book that just came out. Iconic books like Rare Air, that they just have great imagery when we're talking about NBA publications and Slam and Street and Smith and all those great things. Saudia, is there something that you might have looked up to, or when you found your niche in the sport, maybe a photographer, somebody you might have patterned some things for, or patterned an eye for, that you might have, kind of looked at as like, that's the bar you want to ascend to?
I'm going to go back to the Olympics. That was my first opportunity to see anything creative in terms of sports.
Okay.
And there was a gentleman by the name of Bud Greenspan who would do these documentaries after the Olympics were over, the 16 Days of Glory. You might have seen them.
Yes.
And they informed my eye for what I do now. And I never knew it until I started doing this work. That is when I started to realize how influenced I was by Bud Greenspan and his work. So they were, just really very dramatic looking slow-mo shots of Carl Lewis and Jackie Joyner-Kersee, even Matt Biondi in the pool. I don't even know how he was able to film this stuff, but he found ways to tell these unique stories using film, and it was epic. And then Sports Illustrated, obviously, as a kid, that was the way we all got to see all of these iconic sports heroes in competition, but also off the court or out of the field of play. That was really the only thing. Now we have ESPN the magazine, we have Slam, we have all these other outlets, but Sports Illustrated was it for us. So I can remember some of those Sports Illustrated covers, especially when I started to become more familiar with all the pro teams that were in the New York area. And when they were good, when they were actually decent, you can, look back on some of those covers and be like, oh yeah, these are those moments. Those are those still moments that kind of informed what we want to capture.
Outstanding. Now, I would like to ask you to try to recapture a feeling for a moment. We want to go back, your first NBA solo shoot. You're in the Boston Garden, and the lure of the arena itself is already intimidating, probably for vets.
Yeah.
You're probably a little bit unnerved as well. And their biggest rival is in town. I'm talking about the Los Angeles Lakers. And before you stands an NBA great who's waiting to be worked on. And probably just being in his presence is enough to cause pause. And then, out of nowhere, Kobe breaks the ice. What's going on in your mind at that time?
I'll set up before we get into the Kobe bit. I was one of many. We have what we called predators back in the day, and we were the kind of like first at the NBA to start doing this kind of work, where they would send you on the road with a camera, and you were to produce it, and you were to shoot it, and you were to edit it all on your own. But they also gave you the opportunity to go with crews to like direct them and tell them what to film and get everything. That was few and far between for a lot of us young guys. Like all of us who had started after 2003, 2004, we were often on our own. So this was the first time that they sent me out with a crew. And it was because Andy Thompson, and if you guys know anything about the Last Dance, the documentary that just aired on ESPN, Andy was the Kobe Whisperer. He was the Kobe Whisperer. He was also the MJ Whisperer. And he's one of the reasons why they got all that access during the run of the Bulls era. And Andy couldn't go to this particular game. So someone came to me at the NBA. It was like, Andy can't go to this Lakers game. We need somebody to go up there. Can you do it? And I was like, okay. And if you remember anything about the 2008 season, in the beginning, the Lakers were not doing very well.
Not at all.
Not at all. So when we went up there, it wasn't because of the Lakers being in town. It was because, yes, Kobe was there, but it was because the Celtics had that big three at that time. They had Kevin Garnett, they had Ray Allen, and they had Paul Pierce. So the focus was really supposed to be on the big three. And they gave me all of the stuff that I had to do. They were like, you can go into the locker room, make sure you try to get something to set up the game. Paul Pierce sometimes talks to the press beforehand. Other guys are going to run out. I'm like, all right, fine, whatever. And then they said explicitly, Kobe does not talk to media before the game. And I was like, all right, I won't talk to him. And that made my job easier. I thought, okay, well, then I'm not worried about trying to fit into the visiting locker room, and y'all know visiting locker rooms are supposed to be uncomfortable for a reason.
Right.
And the last thing any of the visiting teams want is to be cramped into a space with all these cameras around. So I figured, let me err on the side of caution. I'm not going to go in there unless something needs to happen. So before I went into the Laker locker room, I went in and I got Paul Pierce. He was doing a media scrum. And the guy that I'm working with, Will Taylor, he looks at me and he's like, so this is it? This is all we're going to get? And I was like, Will, I don't think we can get anything else. And he's like, I think we should try to get something from the Lakers. I was like, dude, they told me not to talk to Kobe. I'm not doing it. But he was gung-ho about going in there. So I was like, all right, I don't want to get him in trouble. So let me go with him. And John Black, who works with the Lakers organization, he let us in. He's like, yeah, you can come in. Roni's on the table. So Roni Turiaf is in there. He told me I could go in there. And I'm waiting and anticipating to see Roni Turiaf, and that's it. Kobe's on the table next to him. And Kobe's giving him Mamba talk on the table. And I'm looking, and I'm like, should we leave? Should we film? Will's filming the whole time. And I had no idea. I didn't tell him to. I was kind of trying to figure out where the exit was in case Kobe said, get out. So I sat kind of like off to the side, let Will do his thing. And then Kobe just kind of looked up because he saw the camera and he knew it was on. And I was not ready for it, but he starts talking to us and he goes, NBA entertainment? And I was like, yes. He's like, okay. And I said, Andy was supposed to be here, so I'm Andy today. And he goes, oh, okay. I figured that would be it. And then he looks over and he goes, what's your name? And now I'm like, this guy wants to have conversation. They told me he doesn't like to talk. But for one, it was disarming. I typically had not worked games with superstars on that level. And if I did, I was working as a production assistant. I was assisting someone, grabbing tapes, batteries, whatever. And I was so taken aback. I was so happy to have been accepted. I think that was more than anything, the feeling that I got. I felt like I was finally accepted by the NBA community, in particular, the biggest star of his era. And yeah, I didn't even try and ask him any questions after that. I was like, yo, I got what I wanted. And I didn't know that Will was filming. After the game was over, when we were on our way back to New York, he was like, I got all that stuff that you got with Kobe in the locker room. And I was like, wait, you were filming the whole time? Like, you filmed the whole thing? He goes, yeah, it's on the tape. So that was a wild moment, really wild.
So since we're on the topic of Kobe, his passing, at least for me, is one of those moments that marks a specific moment. Where I was, I know exactly what I was doing when I heard the news. Do you recall where you were and what you were doing when you heard?
Absolutely. This year, well, it was really in 2019, November, we started an expanded program for our women's national team. Because once we get to the Olympics, they will be vying for a 7th gold medal in a row. So what we were trying to do is kind of like drum up some awareness, make sure that we position them in a really good spot so that people knew how big of a deal this was. And that weekend, we were heading up to Connecticut to play the University of Connecticut because we were doing a series of college games and playing in these sold out arenas against these college teams. So it was really supposed to be this celebratory weekend for us where once we came into town, Maya Moore was in town, and Maya hasn't been playing for 2 years, but she was in town because they were honoring her college teams that have won national championships. Breanna Stewart hadn't played in a year, and this was going to be her first game back. Tina Charles came back also to be honored, but we hadn't seen Tina in a while. And Sue Bird was there, Diana Taurasi. Like, we had the entire group of superstar players ready to go and play UConn. And Gino Auriemma, our former head coach of the women's Olympic team, he's coaching on the other side. Like, it was a whole thing. So that Saturday we got in, and all the team, we had our meeting. That Sunday morning, we went to practice. And it was kind of an emotional practice because we had a close friend of Diana and Sue's there who's coaching the Hartford women's team. And we did this thing where we would go to all of these colleges and make sure that all the college teams got to be around our national team and ask them any question, like just give them a safe space. And it got pretty emotional. So it was already starting off as an emotional day. And we leave, we're in Hartford, Connecticut. We all go back to the hotel. And I went back for an edit session, and our digital manager, a few hours later, I'm in the middle of an edit, and he goes, "Kobe, question mark, exclamation point." And I was like, what are you talking about? Because I don't have a TV on, I'm in a hotel, like I'm completely out of sorts. So I shot him another note back. I was like, "Trenton, what are you talking about?" And he goes, "They're saying Kobe's dead." And I was like, I have a hard time believing that. It was,
I don't
honestly,
think anybody believed it.
no, I thought it was a joke. I really didn't know what to say. So my first thing to do was to go on ESPN. And ESPN's scrolling line, their bottom line ticker, didn't have anything yet. Like, this is messy. And then I go onto the internet and I realized TMZ broke the news. And I'm now I'm incensed, because I'm like, if this is a joke, if this isn't true, then somebody needs to fess up to this and apologize immediately, because this isn't cool. And then as time ticks on, as you're going through the Twitter scroll, the doom scroll, as I like to call it sometimes, you start to see people are now acknowledging the fact that Kobe had indeed passed. And I was floored. I also was so numb at the moment, because I knew, one, we as an organization have a real closeness with Kobe and his family, that I have to figure out what my next steps are. Because I'm in charge of social media for USA Basketball. So it's like, I've got to figure out how we're going to mobilize. And then the next thing that I thought about were our players. Is we have 2 or 3 players that were incredibly close to Kobe who were with us on this trip. And not just that, I mean, once we started hearing more news and we realized that Gigi was also with him, we have a lot of our athletes who are now moms and have children of their own. Everyone in our organization and people who are in our organization who've been around Kobe and Gigi when she was very young. It was like a roller coaster of emotions, but at the same time, I still had a job to do. So I had to check my emotions for at least an hour or two and figure out what we were going to do. And then that next day, when we went to shoot around before the game, because we had a game, we had a team meeting, and it was pretty raw. Like, I don't know that any of us walked out of there feeling like we were uplifted. I think we were all just really down.
Absolutely.
And then that game that night, University of Connecticut's women's basketball team, their tribute to Gigi was completely emotional. Like, we did one as a community at that game for Kobe and Gigi, but Gigi had already expressed, and Kobe, I think as well, that she wanted to go to UConn when she was able to go to college. So they acknowledged her, and they put a jersey with her number, a UConn jersey with flowers, on the bench, and left that seat open for her all night. And anytime you passed it, it was, you're still in game mode. Game day is what it is, but every time you saw it, you were hit.
Yeah. I'm sure it's very surreal.
Yeah, it was, for sure.
TJ, come on, man.
Absolutely. Let's try to lift the moment a little bit. Let's talk about
Yes.
USA Basketball is synonymous globally, and it's definitely a big brand in Saudia. Thank you for the impact that you've had on that. But you've also had an opportunity to be a part of one of the most instrumental and influential families that's been a part of basketball as a whole, in the Colangelo family. Tell me what that's been like to work with such a great family, and they've done so much for basketball. And what can you say has been the greatness for them in USA Basketball as well?
I love Jerry Colangelo. I love him. He is a really good guy, just very welcoming and just class act. Jerry, for those that don't know how he became a part of the USA Basketball family, after the 2004 Olympics, I think the organization as a whole knew that there needed to be just a different focus, or maybe just changing some things up a little bit to help put us in a position to win gold again. And Jerry became kind of the managing director of all of that. He came in and he started running the men's national team program along with Sean Ford, who is our men's national team director. Sean, who's also a phenomenal guy, and the work that he's done in the last 20 plus years is, I mean, untold. But Jerry, I mean, he's just, he's got a knack for knowing how to talk to people. You know what I mean? Like he's an easy to talk to kind of guy. And I've only been with the organization for the last 3 years, 3.5. I had not worked with Jerry while I was at the NBA, not formally anyway. I'd worked when he was, still with the Phoenix Suns, and his son, Brian Colangelo, when he was in charge of the Toronto Raptors, and he worked for the Philadelphia 76ers. Like, I worked indirectly with them, but I didn't really know them. And this was the first time that I've gotten face-to-face time with Jerry, and he'll come up to me and ask me about like where I come from, what's my story. He and his wife have been super, super gracious anytime I've seen them on the road. And that's one of the things that I think is really unique about USA Basketball. Whenever we travel as a team, it's not just the team, it's the families as well.
Right.
And I feel as if we make it into a space where people feel comfortable enough to interact like that. So yeah, I can't say enough about Jerry. I think he's been a really great ambassador for USA Basketball, and he's still working with us. Hopefully when we get to the Olympics next year, it'll pay off dividends.
Wonderful. And I hope so too. I know with COVID and everything's been placed on hold, but we wish you guys the best when everything turns back around. The world, as they say, opens back up.
Thank you.
I want to talk to you about something else as well. You've been zoomed in with basketball for a number of years now, and it's been the blunt of your career. Is there any other type of sport that you like to capture visually, or anything that you like to work on outside of just basketball?
Yeah, a couple of things. I mean, I'm influenced by just movement in general. So
Okay.
I've always said that dancers are my favorite athletes.
Oh, okay.
Dancers are they exhibit control and grace all at the same time. And then next to that is track and field. And TJ, you probably know this. When I was at Temple as an undergrad, I started volunteering for Penn Relays.
I remember that.
And and I've been volunteering ever since. I think I've only missed Penn 2 times, other than this last year because of COVID, but 2 times I've missed Penn in the last 20 years.
Wow.
And there's just, I mean, I love track and field. I used to run. That was my sport when I was in high school. It is a sport that is shared amongst my entire family. We're all runners. And there's just such a beauty to it that it's hard to capture, and it challenges me in a way, but I also like being around it. So those are the 2 things I think.
Awesome. Go ahead, Kev.
Track and field. Wow, that's interesting. I know that's probably something. Do you have a lot of footage on that as well that you've captured over the year?
Yeah, there's one meet in particular at Penn. It was Sonia Ross's last Penn Relays appearance, and they asked me to follow her around all weekend. And like, I don't really get starstruck, but I got starstruck. But then she like became my best friend, and it was awesome.
Wow.
Nice.
Yeah.
So we also want to ask you, you were around for the 2012 U.S. men's training camp. Many would say that that's where the proverbial passing of the torch went from Kobe Bryant to LeBron James. How evident was their influence on the team from your perspective?
I mean, whenever Kobe's in the building, you can feel that things kind of ratchet up. And the same with Bron. Like, Bron, his work ethic, I've seen this guy in so many different training exhibitions. There's just a level of detail that he takes, and you guys have seen it. Whenever he talks in a post-game interview and he's talking about plays that got away from him or things that happened right, he's able to break it down with the littlest minutia of detail that you're kind of like, well, what did I miss? Because I didn't see all of that. So I think just as leaders and as guys who show by example, the 2 of them really made an impact on anybody they played with. But I'm going to throw a little wrench into the passing of the torch. I had an interesting interview with Coach K in the last couple months, and we were talking about that 2012 team. And I think everybody kind of like takes a step back and they look at that team and they go, Kobe was the man in 08. I know, I think you do. Kobe was the man in '08, and then LeBron was the man. He won the championship in Miami in 12. He comes on that team. That was a natural passing of the torch. But Coach K was the first, and he was very adamant about pointing this out. He was like, this is KD's coming out party. This was that moment when Kevin Durant, took the stage and just went to the next level. Because if you remember, Kevin Durant was also on that OKC team that lost to the Miami Heat in 2012. So when he came onto that team, he was already pretty established. Not to mention in 2010, on that World Cup team that we had, it was a bunch of young guys. It wasn't Kobe, it wasn't LeBron. It was KD's team. So when KD came into that 2012 year and that went to the Olympics, we don't win the gold medal unless CP3 and KD go off in that gold medal game against Spain.
Right.
So while I think there was a natural course of it's LeBron's league now, in terms of the next man up, that torch was passed to KD for sure.
Absolutely. And 2 years later, he ended up getting the MVP.
Yeah.
He was definitely on the come up at that point. But going off of that previous question, would you say the same torch passing took place with the same year with the women's team between Tamika Catchings and Diana Taurasi?
I would say 08, when Lisa Leslie left. Here's the fun part about our women's national team. It's really hard for us to pick a roster.
Yes.
So many good players who want to come back. And that's a USA basketball phenomenon unto itself. People want to come back and play. And FIBA basketball is not easy. If you go back, and we re-aired 2 of these games, and NBC had actually re-aired 2 of the Olympic gold medal finals for our men's national team. Those gold medal games were hard.
They're
and
tough,
the women's
physical.
team, yeah, they're very physical. FIBA play is very, very physical.
Yes.
And then we're always up against it because these teams that we play against, they've been together for years and years. And sometimes we have a rotation of players and we're just getting to know each other and we don't have training time like they do. And our women's team, we benefit from the fact that we always have this core group. So dating back to 96, we have these grizzled veterans that have been around for a while. And that was Teresa Edwards and Katrina McLean on that team. And the newbies on that team were Lisa Leslie, Dawn Staley, Rebecca Lobo, Jennifer Azzi. And then they had this like little middle group who maybe played in the Olympics before and have a medal or what have you, and had some experience and were a little older than that newbie group. And that just continued, that pattern. So Lisa Leslie was kind of that grizzled veteran along with Tina Thompson and Katie Smith for a while. And the group behind her, the group behind them, that was Catch, Dee, and Sue Bird. So Sue, Diana, and Catch all took the torch from Lisa. And in that 2012 year, they were the grizzled veterans. And the new class was it was Maya Moore, it was Angel McCoughtry, it was Tina Charles. I know I'm leaving people off and I can't think of off the top of my head. Oh, Lindsay Whalen, Simone Augustus. Like we had this natural passing of the torch for the last 25, 30 years. And now the new group, these new kind of like young players, it's Stewie, it's Brittany Griner, Elena Deladon. Yes, I mean, I know that she's a little older, but Elena just played in her first Olympics for us in 2016. And who knows who the newbies will be for this next round. So the torch keeps getting passed naturally, and it's been like a seamless transition every time we do it. And it's so fun to watch.
Well, now that you say it's fun to watch, that was actually going to be my next question. Like, how fun is it to really watch this dominance? And we're not just talking about 2012, because that's what I'm just saying over this span of time, like how incredible is it to watch this dominance?
2-3 decades. It's been a long time.
Kev, it is stressful. When I worked at the NBA, I know when I worked at the NBA, I worked for a league, so I didn't have any affinity for a team. I mean, yes, you have your favorites. You love working with certain players. You love working in certain markets. But when we go into an NBA finals or WNBA finals, we're hoping for a good series. We're hoping that people watch. And now I'm on the team side, and it is tough. Like, dominance doesn't come without an extreme amount of barriers and work. And right now, I don't know if you know anything about our World Cup qualifying system, but we've entered into this new phase where FIBA wanted to do something a little more reminiscent of what our U.S. women's national team and women's or men's national team for soccer do, where they play the CONCACAF and they play all these like qualifying tournaments before they get to their World Cup. So we're doing something similar now. And before last year's World Cup for the men, we then had to start playing in all these games when it was in season for the NBA. So our teams during those windows, we would have to field them with a roster of guys who were free agents and hadn't been signed, or G League players that didn't get a call up or a 10-day contract or anything.
Wow.
So we went through 71 players
Wow.
to get us qualified. And those games were some of the most stressful I have ever been a part of. Because it's just, FIBA basketball is different. And then when you get new guys coming in, you have to explain it to them. But God bless Jeff Van Gundy. I mean, the man was like even keeled throughout the whole thing. Maybe not during practice all the time, but he was just a steady hand at the till. And all of our assistants that were a part of it too, John Thompson III, Mark Fox, Mo McCone, like we had a great staff. And Sean Ford, again, I can't say enough about Sean, because every time we were out of one of those competition windows, Sean was back on the phone trying to find new players. So dominance doesn't come without a lot of steps in between. And then with our national teams, when we have our pro players on those teams, those games are stressful. Like, I'm behind a camera and I'm hoping to be impartial so that I can get what I need. But sometimes you can hear me when you go back and look through the footage, you'll hear my voice like, ref, what? That's not a foul.
Horrible call.
It's tough. But when you win, oh, there's nothing like it. Like our women's national team, before the pandemic kind of shut everything down, we were in Serbia, and our last game was the toughest game in our international play before we came back home. And we played Nigeria, and Nigeria is a tough team. Nigeria is a tough physical team. And they came at us. And we were down double digits going into the fourth quarter, I think. I think we had maybe shrunk the lead down a little bit in the third, but we were down double digits. And I'm looking around and I'm like, and we had great players out on the court for us. Sky was out there, Nneka was out there, Sue Bird was out there. Like, we had great players on the floor. And I don't know what turned the tide, but that was a stressful game for everybody involved. And it was a great win. It was a great feeling afterwards. And I hate those games, but I know we need them.
I got one more for you. Since you talked about how stressful it is and being caught up in the moment, and you're yelling at the ref making terrible calls.
Oh man!
Quietly.
Happen that you're so involved in it that you forget that you're supposed to be working. You didn't capture something that you should have at the moment because you're just so involved in what's happening at that very moment.
I'm going to give myself a pat on the back. I was trained really well because of the NBA, where the whole motto for all of us who worked in anything having to do with production or photos or anything, you had to be a fly on the wall. You're not here to be a part of the story. You're here to capture the story and document it. So coming here after spending 13 plus years at the NBA, I had a good base for knowing how to keep my faculties in check when I'm at a game.
Gotcha.
It has become harder because I've become so used to being in this space and being a part of the team now. But I think I do a really good job of not, showing out and showing off and letting my voice heard. When we get back to the hotel, the team hotel, then you can hear me.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Hey, Saudia, I had to learn the same exact thing because some of the teams that I work for, I show some partiality. I'm just there corresponding and being a host, and I've had to been told in post-production meetings, TJ, sorry about that. So I definitely get it.
Yeah.
Saudia, you've been, like I said, a great part of the global landscape of basketball, national basketball, and NBA entertainment family, USA basketball as well. We've seen in the recent, I would say last 7 or 8 years, there's been a great change and the progression of women just in sports in general, whether it's in the broadcasting, coaching. Coaching now is not just a dominated thing by men. We're having women take over sidelines. We're actually having a woman being brought up as being another head coach for an NBA team this offseason, which is phenomenal. Given all that we've seen and we heard about, where do you think we're pushing women into? And the late, great Kobe Bryant was very instrumental in that,
Yes.
and wanting Gigi to be acclimated into the women's sports world. So what do you think is going to happen next? What has to happen next? What new innovations need to happen to continue to propel our women for equal dominance in male-dominated sports?
It's a hard question to answer for a few things or a few reasons. My path to this point in my career isn't without its challenges, but I'm not here without access, opportunity, and mentorship.
Oh.
So I don't know that it's enough to give someone an opportunity to do something and show what they can do. It's also about giving them the right tools to be able to do it. And I can't say enough about the folks who've pushed me and given me all the kind of time that they could give up whilst they were trying to do their work and doing what they do really well.
Right.
So I mentioned Andy Thompson before. Andy was amongst a group of other producers and directors at the NBA that really allowed me to ask whatever questions I had. I didn't even know this was what I wanted to do. Like I said before, I was a writing major in college. So when I got out, my whole identity was kind of shifted when I realized I didn't see a job for myself. Magazine journalism was kind of going by the wayside and they weren't really hiring. So when I found this space, I had no idea what questions to ask. I didn't really know what this was. And all these different producers at NBA Entertainment really were great about answering any questions I had or giving me suggestions if they saw that my mind was, focused on something that could potentially be like a stepping stone. So the other thing, it wasn't just the guys. Like there were a lot of men that I worked with, Ken Gagne, Sean Kelly, Dion Kokoros. I could keep going on and on the list. George Land is now one of the head guys for NBA Africa and was one of the most instrumental folks for NBA China for the last 10 years. George was one of my most frequent top two mentors, I guess. But there were also women in those spaces that gave me opportunity. And that was really key for me to be able to see women doing what either I was doing or I could achieve myself. So Corey Davis Porter, Kathleen Reedy, Annette Raschuti, all these women took me under their wing and they were facilitating me kind of getting through different doors. Heather Messer, I could keep going on and on because I think the NBA did a really good job of hiring women in these positions and giving me an opportunity to use them for all their knowledge and wisdom. And that's what we need. We need more mentorship. And then once we supply folks with tools and give them some opportunity to ask questions, we give them those chances to do the job. And I think it's already starting to show off. I think we're starting to see it happen.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. When we started our interview today, you talked about how your family used to gather during some great Olympics in the past, and Olympic moments are always great. And I'm sure you've also been a part of some great moments as well with USA Basketball. What is your all-time great and favorite classic Olympic moment? Any type of sport, track and field, winter, summer. What does it for you? What's your number one?
That's an easy question to answer. Gail Devers, 100-meter dash, 92 Olympics. She wasn't even the favorite. And then somehow, with the whip of her ponytail, won that race. She did it again in 96. I would say a combination of those 100-meter runs for her and then the 100-meter hurdle loss for her. I don't know if you remember that, but in the Barcelona Olympics, she had already won the 100-meter dash. So I didn't know who she was. I knew she was good, but she didn't win the US trials. So now she was like, oh, this is my favorite. I love her. And then she lined up, was the favorite for the 100 hurdles, and then clipped I think either the 7th or 8th hurdle. I don't remember which hurdle she clipped, but basically stumbled across the line. And I don't know why that is one of my top moments, but I think it made me realize that athletes are human. I think if you remember that same Olympics, Derek Redmond pulled up, like his hamstring was all messed up in the 400, and his dad came out, ran onto the track and finished the race with him. Like those are the moments that stay with me because I realized how human those moments are and how human these athletes are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's real.
Yeah.
Kev P.
I want to go back just a hair
Mm-hmm.
to today's previous question because he asked about women in basketball, and I know that you've been involved with the NBA since 2003, and you've held several high-level positions from the visual standpoint for both men and women's leagues.
Mm-hmm.
In a world where these positions, particularly in sports, are male-dominated, share with us the significance of holding down not only the women, but as a woman of color as well.
It becomes more apparent to me how few women and how few Black women occupy these spaces when I'm on the road and people come up and they marvel at the fact that I'm running around with a camera. And it becomes more apparent when I'm with a men's team. I don't know why this is. I think this is something that we have to work on just as people in general. But when I'm traveling with our men's teams and you see me running around and I'm a Black woman, it just becomes one of those things. It's like, how did you get this job? How did this happen for you? And I don't mind answering those questions. I think these are teachable moments to make sure that folks understand, like there are women who want to occupy these spaces too. Oftentimes, I think the entertainment industry as a whole, especially in sports, we kind of steer women into these administrative roles. Like we assume that that's what they want. You want to be a project manager. You want to be able to kind of like organize things, and that there's nothing wrong with those positions because I have to do those things with my job as a creative director. I have no problem with those jobs. It's just those aren't the only jobs that we want to occupy.
Right.
And it makes me feel good, but it makes me feel challenged in a way where I want to make sure that other women, and particularly young Black women, feel empowered to be a part of this. You don't have to have a certain look. You don't have to run around and like talk a certain way, or there's no template. There's no model. Like, do you know how to use a camera? Can you frame a shot? Are you willing to work your butt off? And are you willing to take criticism? That should be it. And then whether you're a woman, whether you're a man, if you're young, if you're hungry, this could be a place for you to succeed. And there's so many that I see right now. Like, I think a lot of the NCAA teams are doing great. Their digital departments at some of these schools, like Clemson, South Carolina, we've worked with some of their group before. My intern this last summer, she is at Ohio State. She was phenomenal, great designer. Like, we have young women who are coming up in the game who are working for these NCAA teams, and they're doing really great work. So I'm encouraged. I hope that this is kind of the place where we turn it a corner and then we start to see more women occupying these spaces and seeing more women of color, Black women, Latino. I mean, I really want to see a lot of Latinas in this space. I don't see a lot of Latinos in general, Latino men, women. Like, it's something that we need to do a little bit more work about.
Got it. And I agree with you. I have the pleasure of working with some outstanding women with the teams and organizations I work with. Shout out Coach Nell with Under Armour and the Junior NBA, and also shout out KB. They're phenomenal women, and they know how to capture things vividly. And they're also great leaders. Like, I don't know, I have no problem listening to women. They actually got things more organized. They lead better. I don't know. Like, it just makes more sense.
I'm not going to argue that point.
Absolutely. I'm going to be real with you when I say that. Listen, we got one more great question for you. It's been an honor. It's been a pleasure so far, but I want to leave you with this one. If you had to make the ultimate USA basketball team, we're taking gender out of it. We're going to give you 10 people, the ultimate USA basketball team that have adorned that red, white, and blue to represent our country. What 10 would it be? Male and female. Let's go.
I'm not taking this bait. This isn't what I do. I would get in trouble with whomever I leave off of this list. I am not doing that. This is something we do on our social channels, and we make all the fans do it, because then when they go off in the comments, we're like, good point. But I'm not choosing. Like if I were to take MJ over Kobe, it would be complete flambe flames on my reputation. So I don't want to do it. What I will say is this.
Okay.
I think sometimes our bigs don't get enough attention. So what I will say is I would love to see more love for our bigs. In particular, in the last, I don't know how many years, they've just been so versatile. So you take like 2012 Olympics and 2016, you had AD, on our women's team. You had Tina Charles, who plays a center, but when she comes to our team, she doesn't naturally play a center. You have Brianna Stewart, who's kind of like a swing, and she can do whatever she wants. She can bring the ball up the floor. BG, who, I mean, when BG's out of the lineup, you can tell. You can definitely tell. So that I'm going to give a shout out to our bigs and our front court. And that is it. I'm not picking teams.
I tried, Kev. I thought I was
not doing it.
Oh, good.
I thought I'd try it.
And shout out to Boogie Cousins as well.
Yeah,
Boogie,
let me
great
say,
guy.
can I share something?
So we can't get you to pick between the original Dream Team, the Redeem.
Absolutely not.
All right,
No.
we'll go.
Shout out to my man Boogie, because Boogie was the guy that made me research and find the official Nike warm-up, the elite Nike warm-up. I had to get one because I seen Boogie on some, I don't know what it was. Boogie was wearing it. I was like, oh, what is that? I want that suit. Like, so I had to get myself one. So I wear that when I go to airports. I take flights. It's very comfortable. Got a hoodie on it, so it keeps me warm on my flight. So shout out to my man Boogie for that.
Yes,
We've been talking about these warm-ups forever.
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been a phenomenal episode. We wanted to say thank you. We're honored, humbled, and so gracious for your presence this evening, Miss Saudia Mitchell. And listen, whenever you want to come back to the Stoop, by all means, just reach out. You are now an official member of the Stoop crew. So thank you for sitting down with us today.
Thank you so much.
Sure. With everything that got going on, listen, we wish you all the best with you, women's basketball, men's basketball, USA basketball. And we hope that the world gets back together soon so you can go out and do your thing, all right?
Thank you so much, TJ, Kev. This was really great. And I had a great time. So I appreciate you guys just adding some levity to my day. It's definitely lifted up for sure.
Absolutely. Well, on behalf of my guy, Kev P, this has been another great episode of The Stoop. We'll catch you next time.
Some say that it gets no real on the field or the court. We capture the thrillers. Some opinions and all of the truth. Real people talking real sports on The Stoop.